Welcome to the Atheist Podcast. I'm Erin.
And I'm Kelley. Atheist is where we will explore American cultural trends through the lenses of a devout theist
and a devout atheist. We will discuss the messiness of being human,
the latest in social science, psychology, and American culture,
and what any of it has to do with Homo sapiens' longtime preoccupation with religion. Hey, Kelley.
Hey, Erin.
How's it going?
It's going good. It's going good. It's a kind of a snowy day here. I think we're
another one.
Another snowy day. We're kind of stuck inside today. Yeah, but we're gonna have a good conversation.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation. We're gonna talk about the history of information networks from the beginning of Homo sapien to artificial intelligence.
Just a small topic.
Right. So basing it on so Yuval Harari, who if you guys are longtime listeners of the show, yeah, you've heard me talk about him before. So he has a new book. It's called Nexus. And what I think we've talked a little bit about this book on a previous episode, but to kind of like set it up, the thing that he's kind of getting at, like, so Yuval for a long time in Sapiens, right? His whole thing was the Homo sapien as the storytelling animal, our ability to tell stories, share them, and then have like commonly shared stories amongst like really large groups of people and strangers is really what like allows society to be built at the scale that it is today.
And some of those stories that he talks about are like religious stories, but then also the idea of like economics is a story.
Yep. It's just a common story that we all believe in that allows us to cooperate with people we don't know. And so like there's the way that he says it, cooperate flexibly and in large numbers. So there are other species that can cooperate flexibly, but not in large numbers. And there's species that can cooperate in large numbers, but not flexibly. Right. And so we're the only one that can do both. Now the other kind of like argument that he makes in Sapiens that kind of like builds on what that foundation we were just talking about is like we have our like physical kind of reality, which is oceans, mountains, lions, right? Like and then so it's like the objective reality. These things are material. And then there is the subjective reality. So this might be something like an economy, right? That was kind of the way that he would frame it when he wrote the first book, or like a religious belief or whatever, right? These are things that are not like
the idea of love.
Yes, that's a
concepts.
great concepts. So the Nexus kind of takes that argument that he was making in Sapiens and like adds another layer to it, which is that so there's the objective reality, like we talked about the mountains and rivers and all that. The subjective reality is more like, now the way that he's saying is it's more like my feelings about something, right? And then there's intersubjective reality. And that's like you believe the same thing that I believe, right?
Okay.
And that intersubjective reality is where power comes from.
Oh, tribalism.
I mean, everything, right? Like it's like if when we talk about like this from an economy standpoint, right? Like the power is that we all actually believe these same things,
right?
So yeah.
And then you have people like the Unabomber who are like your outliers who are saying like, I'm not going to buy into this story that everybody's going to buy into, and then they become, well, they don't
outside actors.
Outside actors. Yeah.
So so that's kind of like one of the big key takeaways of the new book. The other, like as you kind of like walks through, so he really does start at like the history of like information networks. So we go from like an oral tradition, so humans sharing stories.
So can I ask a clarifying question here?
Yeah.
So information systems. Information systems, is he defining that as ways that people participate in intersubjective
Reality. Yeah.
reality? Okay.
Yes.
So if I want you to drink my Kool-Aid,
Yeah.
um, then I'm going to use some kind of information system
Yeah.
to convince you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Um, and it's kind of like, yeah, like the information network, right? Like
Network.
and that's kind of like the network, the nexus, right? Like this
Yeah.
connected, shared belief in like the information.
Okay.
So like, so when we start, like, here's a good, and this is a good example, is like the first one. So is this shift from, um, oral tradition
Hmm.
to lists and documents.
Yeah.
So he goes from like, okay, like if you, before there are lists and documents, if something's like your land, it's kind of like you have to like just agree upon it with your neighbors, right? Or
Right.
whoever's in your group, right? Or the people that are around. It's like, okay, you believe that this is my land and I believe that this is my land, and that's how we negotiate things, right?
Right.
But then once you have the ability to like create lists of things where it's like a document that says, I own this property, right?
Yeah.
That like it changes everything. Like it is the foundation of like civilization on mass.
But we also have to agree somehow orally
Yeah,
that these
yeah.
documents have power.
Yes, yes, we do. And actually, what's interesting is like he
Or
gives all
like,
these examples of cases where the documents like matter like that the societies have basically said like that is the word, like that is the source of truth, right?
right.
Are these documents. And so like if someone lost the document, you would be like, you don't know that land anymore because that document is lost.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Um, and he like, and then he even tells a story about his own family, which was, I think it was his grandfather who was fleeing Poland. I don't know if I have all the specifics right, but essentially, like, he had to be able to show his like birth certificate, and he didn't even. His grandfather was like, I don't even know where to find this document,
Yeah.
like to
Yeah.
show that I'm a real person that
Yeah.
was born, you know.
Yeah.
And then he talks about how like they eventually were able to get to these documents, but some people weren't because the buildings that those documents were held in were destroyed. And so like essentially any record of their like existence was wiped away. But then like the documents became so important to like the future generations of family members where
Sure.
like everything was, anything that seemed like it was an official record was meticulously kept because people were like, you have to be able to prove where you are from, so
Right.
that you can avoid potentially being like thrown into some sort of concentration camp or something, right? Like, I
Right.
mean, it was a very serious matter of the curation and collection of like the documents, right?
Yeah.
um but the other thing that kind of so these documents then allow for this concept of like a bureaucracy to take hold, right? So you have
Yes.
like a government or a religious institution or state
Yeah.
that is being created, and he was like, this becomes really difficult for humans to like deal with and understand, because what happens in bureaucracies is that all the information becomes so complex, like
Uh-huh.
it's really hard for people to understand because we just want a simple story. And like you have to have bureaucracy in order to like create a society at scale,
Right.
but individual people really really struggle with these concepts.
Yeah. 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 I mean, most of us, yeah, still, right. We still do.
Yeah. The
It's a,
example he gives us really like, I mean, you probably have heard this story before, but it was like the it's like a physician in London where there was an outbreak of I don't remember which disease. It was like a,
plague.
yeah, a pathogen that was basically spreading throughout the cities, or the city, and this one physician was like, we're going to figure out like where people are getting this disease from, and they're able to, because of lists, right? Like he's
Yeah.
able to go around and like document like where everybody lives, where did they get sick, when did they first get symptoms, blah blah blah, and then figures out, oh, there's this water source that like the waste is leaking into this water source and it's getting everybody sick, right? And so like Yuval's point is like the bureaucracies that we all like get frustrated by, oh, I don't understand it and it's wasteful, but they're like literally keeping your drinking water clean, right?
Yeah.
These complex systems that like allow society at large to just function.
Function. So there's this documentary on HBO. I just spent 5 minutes trying to find it and I couldn't find it. But it's fascinating because it's about the history of basically the history of like money and how money evolved and the story of money.
Mm,
And and um just this whole thing about bureaucracy and how people don't trust or understand really what bureaucracy is, but how important it is. One of the points that the documentary makes is that taxes were originally used, that the point of taxes was to create um, an engagement from the citizenry to the controlling government. So the way that, and to get people
yeah.
to work, right?
Yeah.
So we need people to work. We need people to work in this system. So we have to tax them in order to kind of as a um
Like a buy-in.
as a buy-in, as one of these kind of tools of information,
Bureaucracy. Yeah.
bureaucracy and
Yeah.
information. So for them, they're the whole point of this documentary is this kind of new economics where they say for countries that create their own coinage that's not shared among other
Yeah. Yeah.
countries, basically like a our debt means nothing. Now, a lot of people will argue that. Um, but the story of debt, what does debt mean? What is,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, just, yeah, all of these things. And especially right now in what's happening in our government and the fear of bureaucracy, right? And the
Yeah, the
fear,
dismantling of
yeah,
bureaucracy. So
yeah,
that's a bit, I mean, that's like, kind of like an authoritarian playbook, right? Is
right,
to say is because people are not great at grasping the value of bureaucracy, it's easy to like tell a simple story that gets people to turn against it, right?
right,
And so like other examples too are just like when you have stuff that like big events that happen, that there's a lot of destabilization, let's say, so like the 2008 financial crisis or COVID, then it's like it's easy to sort of be like these bureaucracies don't work, and
right,
to kind of like push into dismantling that apparatus.
right,
And so, like, even though, I mean, and that's also like where those sorts of things become really ripe for conspiracies, because
right.
conspiracies are some sort of story, like a simple
Yeah,
story that's being applied that kind of
to a
undermine
complex
those.
problem. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. The other thing that was sort of interesting is like, oh yeah, yeah, I forget. He mentions that the actually like etymology of the word bureaucracy is like bureau, like of the desk or something, right?
yeah,
Is like,
yeah,
so he also talks about from a religious standpoint, the like that shift from oral tradition
yep,
to the creation of like a book. So for example,
yeah,
like the Bible,
yep,
or the New Testament, like that you also have humans
right,
making decisions about like what's going to be included and what's not.
right,
However, the way that that information is presented by, at least like more orthodox,
yeah,
from a more orthodox viewpoint, is like, well, this is like the word of God. So it's not, it's infallible, right? Like
right,
there's no room for mistakes in here, because this has been like given from heaven.
right,
So the thing that he talks about is like that a successful, um, kind of like bureaucracy, or like the foundation of like a democracy, is that it asserts in the foundation that it is not infallible, that it is fallible.
Yeah.
So like the Constitution, for example, includes the tools of its own correction. It says in the document, hey, if 2/3 of us are like, we think that we made a mistake, and probably when they were writing it, they were already looking at like, there's this slavery question that we know is wrong, and we want to be able to change it. I mean, I would assume, right, that that's probably like was in the back of everybody's minds, and like we
Maybe.
need a mech. Well, at least
Hopefully,
a lot.
hopefully.
I mean, it
A lot
was
of them, yes.
for a lot of the people that were trying
Yeah.
to negotiate this, the new nation. There
Right.
was, we know that there was a lot of people that was already like a
Yeah.
conflict, right?
Yeah.
So so they're going to say, hey, this is a document that's made by humans. Humans make
Mhm.
mistakes. We should make it possible that there's an ability to correct these mistakes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so
When was the last time we actually had an amendment to the Constitution?
right, I know like Biden tried to like pretend there was one right before he left office, but let's see.
There's
And
a, while you're looking that up, there's a great one woman show, and there's a film of it on Prime called What the Constitution Means to Me. And it's a great, I think she won the Pulitzer for it. Um, but it talks about what the Constitution and the kind of the interpretation of the Constitution and how we interpret it, how different judges interpret it,
interpret it.
and the idea of penumbra, and that it's a document of negative rights as opposed to a document of positive rights,
Oh,
which is
interesting.
very interesting. And then she has a debate at the end with a young girl from the wherever they're doing the show on whether the Constitution should be scrapped and start over, or whether we should continue with the Constitution with the hope of like changing it. Yeah,
Yep,
it's really
yep.
good. I highly recommend it.
So the
Yeah.
last constitution or amendment to the Constitution is the 27th Amendment in 1992, and
Oh,
it
okay.
stipulates that any law altering the compensation for members of Congress can
Oh,
only take effect after the subsequent election of the House of Representatives. It was originally proposed in 1789 alongside the Bill of Rights, but remained unratified for over 2 centuries.
wow.
Who knew,
That
right?
was the last one. Okay.
So to
So
kind of
yeah.
go back to like, verses, you have like the Ten Commandments, which are like, these are the laws of God. There is like, you have to follow it, even though like he also mentions in there the original version of like, you cannot covet your neighbor's like stuff includes slave, which
Yeah.
we now like a lot of places omit that.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing that was really interesting was he talked about like when people initially were being tasked with making like hand copies essentially of the
Yep.
Bible
Yeah.
and religious texts, that there was like a law that was like you're like no one was allowed to interrupt them while they
Mhm.
were copying certain passages so that they could ensure that it was like an exact replica. And he said
Right.
that but like now that they have, obviously historians have gone back, that there's not one version that's really the same.
We have like hundreds and thousands of extant, copies of things that they put together, try to put together the best text. But there's changes even now because of technology, because now we have these ancient texts um, di digitized.
Yeah.
Now, for the first time, you can actually look at things that have, while they've been like, these texts have been like in faraway places and all spread out. So it was hard to kind of look at them side by side. Now you can actually look at them side by side and compare. And because of that, and because of also women and things that have happened in the church, and women have more access and, can be ordained in so many different, and are studying religious texts. You also have women's eyes on these texts for the first time. And so now we see those kinds of changes and mistakes, quote unquote, or ways that things have been redacted or changed or censored. And so there's whole kind of schools of interpretation called like, um, you know, based on that. And we're learning a lot. And I would also put it to like this idea of like religious texts. And obviously you said like orthodox or fundamental, when you look at a text as, inherently inerrant.
Infallible. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But you know, Jewish people have always looked at the text and looked at some of the interpretation called midrash. And as they write and as they kind of take the scholars would take their lives and the understanding of life and kind of apply it to text, the Torah, and then write midrash. And then the midrash actually becomes as sacred as the Torah itself. And I find that so it like the idea that it's a really a living document, like hope, the Constitution should be, and
Yeah, yeah.
different kind of things. And I think in other, for other religious texts, there are interpretations, and when you go and you study, you look at all those different interpretations, but they're not given the same kind of weight that I think the Jewish
Yeah,
people put.
it was kind of the way that he kind of framed it too was like he was like at first it was sort of like we're going to write this down and then there will be no more interpretation, right?
Right, right,
Because like there you go from like always like all everyone just sort of telling stories and interpreting their own point of
yeah,
view, and he's like this will be the end of that sort of interpretation, and then it just like explodes in terms of the different ways that people can interpret that document,
right, right. Well, and
yeah,
anytime you also have a big document, I mean, like you can prove anything, right? You can
yeah.
take different things out and prove it. So yeah, things can be weaponized in so many different ways. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So documents, lists, and documents and bureaucracy.
Yes, and bureaucracy. So then, okay, so then it goes to, so you have like these like hand copied documents. Then we move into, the printing press. And
Yes.
so he tells this great story about how, like, when we kind of study the printing press, well, okay, actually, let me take it one step back. So he also takes kind of like painstaking time to lay out this theory of like the naive view of information. And
Okay.
the naive view of information is that more information is better.
Right.
And we know now that is not true.
That is certainly not true.
But up until like even, I mean, you can look at statements from like, George Bush, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, like even in this like modern history cohort where people are sort of saying the internet is going to like be the best thing for the democratization of information, truth, spreading truth. And
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
the opposite
Yeah.
of what people thought it was going to be. Because up until that point, people really sort of like believed this story that like, oh, when we just have increased the amount of information that people have access to, it really like is powerful for democratic systems. But
Right.
that actually has really never been true. And so that's kind of like sets the table. But why it's never been true, so that naive view, like I feel like when I was taught in school, it was like, oh, and then there was the printing press, and then everyone had
Yeah.
like access to books. So then it was like the scientific revolution and blah blah blah. But
Right.
that's not exactly how it went. So how it actually went was there were people printing science books, but the bestseller of the day when the printing press came to be was books about like witches and hunting witches. Like it was
What?
like literally a manual for hunting witches was like the
The
number
number one
one book.
bestseller.
And it sparked like the witch hunts all over Europe, eventually like in the Americas, like that book was and the printing press were the foundation of like mass killings of people,
Wow.
families, and it was like just I mean, it was insane, actually.
Wow.
And very few people actually were the like reading these scientific books that would go on to like be like, okay, we're going to establish this scientific
This
revolution.
shared knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, it's the foundation of like our more formal public educational system
Yeah.
was a reaction to
Oh,
these witch hunts.
yes, 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 yes. Well, and to this idea of like so much knowledge, yeah, what to kind of
Yes.
discern, the discernment of knowledge, which when we start talking about AI, that's the key with AI right now too.
Yep, yep. And that's the like the and when I was reading that section about like the what was it? I think it's like the Hammer of the Witches or something is like the name of the book. But it's I was like garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's that. It's and it's like if we're training, we talk about AI systems and training AI systems, if if the information that they are trained on is garbage, they will
Right.
produce garbage, right? If they are being fed good information curated in the right way, it will produce good output, right? So
Well, and also just the idea that yes, that yeah, that you need to discern the information that goes in, but then when AI like spits out stuff, it spits out good and bad ideas. So you still need educated, trained people in their field to be able to discern what are the good and what are the bad uh
yeah,
ideas that
exactly.
come out.
And that's where, when we think about like science or the scientific revolution or scientific thinking, the discernment, like
Yeah.
that's like the philosophy of discernment, right?
Yep.
Is saying it's designed to be self-correcting, like the Constitution. It's saying,
Yep.
here is a study that I've done. Now I'm going to like put it out to other people, colleagues, peers in my field, and I'm asking you to challenge the work, right?
Yep. Yep.
And find out like where I am wrong so that we can produce the best possible version, right?
Yep.
And what's hard is like that kind of goes back to that like bureaucratic system, right? Is
Yes.
like, and the part of the reason that people I think struggle to like, I mean, at least I found, right, that are people are struggling to accept science
Yep.
and bureaucracy right now, it's like, well, sometimes it's wrong. And it's like, yes,
Yes.
that's the kind of the point, right?
Yeah.
Like the whole point is like that these are not infallible systems. They are purposefully saying
Yep.
we don't always get it right. It's impossible for one person to get it right. The only way that we get it right is with like this collective effort that is kind of beyond the scale of like all
A
of
few
us to
people.
really, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and yeah, and so the terrifying thing when Trump comes in and like fires all these
The
what are they called?
FAA and the
Well,
people with the nukes.
all the people that are supposed to be the supervisors that are like that are the discerners, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
to kind of yeah, to root out those kind of oh man. Yeah, what do they call them? I'm forgetting words. Thanks, menopause.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
This
like
is like
these like the government civil service, right?
yeah, yeah, but like those people specifically who are like tasked with with rooting out not necessarily like, I mean corruption, but like other things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the what's kind of interesting actually, I was like looking at this study and it the bureaucratic state now is actually smaller than it was like 20 years ago.
Really.
What's increased is the amount of money that's spent on like essentially like outside consultants, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
private companies that the government is like outsourcing a lot of the work to is where a lot of that expense
Yeah.
comes from. But
Well, and I think this idea, I'm really liking this idea of like discernment and the importance of discernment in information systems. And I just think everybody agrees we need better discernment, but how we do that?
yeah. And like so then, you think about like obviously like I go to social media, or like, the way that it's like, so you have this like volcano of information. There's
Yeah.
way too much information, more information being produced every single day than one person could ever get through in their whole lifetime.
Yep.
Way too much. And most of it is bad information,
Yes.
misleading, not authoritative. There is no gatekeeping or
Right.
like self-correction that is going on in any of
Right.
these systems. And any, the like, I mean, it's no wonder that
Yeah.
that everyone's like struggling with just
Yeah.
basic existence.
Yeah. Which then impedes how we communicate, right? And
Yep.
how we are able to find common ground in these what is it?
Oh,
Objective.
intersubjective reality.
Yeah.
We don't have it. Or
Our
yeah, there
intersubjective reality is blown to shit.
yeah, it's broken. Yep.
It's
Yep.
broken.
No, it's true. That's true. I mean, like and this has happened in a really short period of time. I mean,
Yeah.
there are lots of people that are alive today who, when they were, you know, 20 years old, like there was really only like a couple of television channels. There was a few
Yeah.
newspapers. Like people had a common set of,
Yeah. Yeah. Erin, that you
some.
don't have to be that old to like that's what I remember.
I know that's what that's what I'm saying is
I
like
had three channels, maybe five channels.
that's what I'm saying. This is new. Like this
Yeah.
is like
Yes.
new for
Yeah.
humans to have. And even then it would have been like, oh, this is a lot of like, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like having like two channels was like, this is a lot of channels,
Well,
right?
and even in that, you had no you had no flexibility. So you would only hit information when it was convenient to your life.
Oh yeah, yeah, like at the 5 o'clock news, right?
Yeah,
Or I'm sitting down and I'm reading the newspaper. And at the time, those are also like being created in a way that like I mean, you go back and read some of those reports. I mean, you can see the bias that seeps in to that kind of reporting, but like, it's not the level of like engagement, enragement,
yes.
that it's like the algorithms are sort of incentivize
Yep.
like in they incentivize engagement, which
Constant.
equals people being upset, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's what tends to draw eyeballs, like, and that's the old like it bleeds, it leads, right? Like
Yep.
you're
Yep.
much more likely to um put something on the news that's negative, right?
Yep.
That gets people's attention than
Yeah.
like positive stories.
Right. Right. I think I told you that when I was down in Florida, my mom said to me, um, "Oh, turn on Fox News. I like to get riled up."
Yeah.
I was like, "You realize what you're saying?" I'm like, "You are just, yeah." She was like,
Makes me feel alive,
"Yeah,
right?
right." I mean, she just that's what it does. It gives people this, yeah, chemical hit.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of goes back to that conversation too that we were like having the last time, which was um the so like what's tight, right? Is like the
Yeah,
family is tight, the tribe is tight, or the tribe is tight, the village is dispersed, right?
yeah, yeah,
But that those are preferred channels of information, is a
right.
way to like be tight with the tribe,
Yep.
and then we're gonna go find some witches to hunt,
Yeah,
you
and then
know?
yeah, it's a totally yeah, it's like we're going back to the simplest of stories right
Yep.
now.
Yep. And it is always that, right?
Yeah,
Like
it
it,
is
I
all.
mean, and we can lament the strategy of the current administration, but like, I mean, when I look at like the flaws of the Democrats, it's like
Yeah,
the Democrats are like,
they don't have a
hey,
story.
No. And I get that they're like the bureaucracy is good and it's like, we have to have it to function as a society and like they're right about that. But like they also need to recognize that if you're going to mobilize like massive amounts of people, you're going to have to figure out how to tell a simple story that people can get on board with.
Exactly. Ezra Klein this morning, I don't know if you saw him, if you heard him.
Uh-uh.
He is doing a story now about what well he started by saying, I went around to all the Democrats, well, all of them, a bunch of Democrats in the
Yeah.
House, and asked them, if you had won, and if you had won all three houses, would you, or all three branches, what would you do? Like what would be the first thing that you would do? And all of them said, I don't know. All of them.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yep. 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 Yeah. Um, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay.
that,
So we have the printing press, more information, not necessarily good, and particularly at the start of a new information system, there's going to be a lot of disinformation,
turmoil.
a
Yeah.
lot of turmoil, and until we can kind of create some kind of self-regulating discernment system,
Yeah.
which obviously, the printing press, we wouldn't not want to have the printing press. We certainly,
Correct. Right. Right. And so then, we developed public education. We said, hey, if everyone's going to have access to all this information, we better like help people give them some tools
right.
to apply critical thinking when they are engaging with this information to, be able to be more astute with how they're
Yeah,
approaching the information that they're
right.
getting. Right. And so, like, we obviously need that right now in our social media generate like this generation. I mean, that's going to be essential is for people to be able to, kind of use those skills to like
Yeah.
um, apply to this highly manipulative
Mhm.
information. I mean, I also really take the position that we need to adopt Section 230, which would hold these platforms accountable for false information that's being put on their platforms. Instead, we
Right.
have like the opposite, which is like,
Right.
oh, we're total free speech, blah, blah, blah. Like it's
Right.
just all nonsense. Um, anyway, but so then that's, I mean, also leads us to like, so we have that problem already here. And
Right.
then we're going to the next phase is artificial intelligence, which is like the phase that we're currently moving into. Really, since we just to kind of like set the framework. So we're going to continue this conversation about artificial intelligence in a part two, in terms of like what's the future portend, right? But to kind of set the table stakes for everybody that maybe are not as familiar with what's going on with artificial intelligence is where we are with artificial intelligence is like early days of the internet.
Yep.
So,
Super
uh,
early. Like,
yeah, 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 yeah.
like, yeah, like
Picks
dial-up.
and shovels. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, like, you think about early days of the internet is just laying the connectivity. So,
Mhm.
like, that my computer can connect to your computer, that can connect to this person's computer. So it's like the hardware. So when we think about NVIDIA, Broadcom, all the chip manufacturers, this is like that hardware phase. Then you have the next layer, which is software.
Mhm.
So in early internet, it's like Internet Explorer, right? Or like
Yeah.
now I have a vehicle for which like a normal person who's not super technical can access this technology. So in our world, that's ChatGPT, Claude, right? That you've have the LLMs that allow normal people to like access this technology. And then what's going to happen is there are going to be apps that are built on top. So the apps built on top of now would be Google Chrome is everything that we deal with, right? Like Amazon, like any of these giant companies that have been built on top of the internet apparatus. We're going to have all these companies that are going to be built on top of that, these LLMs.
Right. And and we're talking anything from like a personal assistant who can tell you before you buy that book on Amazon, um, how likely you are to actually read the book,
Yeah, yeah.
to to maybe curing cancer, to
Yeah.
also be like taking over and killing all of us.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Agents is like the term that people are using, right? So like agentic AI, but essentially that these applications, like you said, right, is going to be like your assistant, like your buddy or your colleague,
Yeah, a
you know.
collaborator, even
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, which I think there's so much potential. There's so much potential. And they've been collecting our data forever. So when we like the idea of like us going, why did I get an ad for literally that bag that I was just looking at in an airport?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like what saw me look at that
That
bag?
knows it better. They will know you better than you know yourself.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that already happens, but now it's going to be like, okay, we're going to aggregate all this data about you. And now, actually, we might benefit. There might be some benefit other than just ads thrown at us. Um, yeah, I'm
Yes, there
hoping.
might. I know. So that's gonna be our the next conversation that we have is gonna be like, okay, so this is the new phase. What are the
Yeah.
pros and cons, right?
Yeah.
So join us for part two of our discussion on artificial intelligence, where we're gonna dive into like what does this next phase of technology mean for culture, society, religion, government, in our individual experience. Like this will transform everything as we know
Everything.
it in the
Everything.
ways that all these other technologies have,
Yeah.
right? If
Yeah.
and every single technology transforms society in ways that we can sort of anticipate and in ways that we don't anticipate, you
Right.
know.
Right. All right. It's exciting and terrifying.
Indeed. Awesome. Always good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you too. A huge heartfelt thank you to all of our listeners. Some of you joined us a year ago, some of you joined us recently, but all of you are helping us grow the show. Thank you so much.
Atheist is still advertising free, sponsor free, and available for free to everyone. Lots of podcasts have big production teams. Our team is just 3 friends working together to make something we hope puts good into the world and brings value to your life.
But we always need your help. Please spread the word and share the show. All of our social links and other ways to support the show are available on atheistpodcast.com.
Atheist is produced by Justin Sywell of Trend Media, STL. Thank you for listening, and keep looking for connection.